All right. So on creating users here, the first thing we want to talk about is, and we talked about this at the very beginning of the semester, and that is the fact that Linux is a multi-user system. And this was a big deal when it came out, because if you kind of compare it to Windows, Windows was not a multi-user system. It was single user oriented. And you can kind of see that. I mean, they've made huge strides today. They do have a multi-user system, but think about your desktop, your regular desktop running Windows 11. It is not a multi-user system. It is a single user. It does have like fast switching in between the accounts, but you can't have several people logged into that system all at once. Now, if you go to their server edition does allow for multiple users to be logged in. The last time I looked, it's like 2 administrator accounts can be logged in at the same time. But then once you pass 2, what do you think Microsoft wants? Yep, money. They want those licenses. You got to pay that additional license fee if you want to get past those 2 multi-users. Compare that against Linux, who on their desktop, their server versions, whatever version you choose, you can have as many users as the hardware will allow for you to run on that. So quite groundbreaking, especially in the day. And then kind of just reviewing how we have SU. That's a good command if you are administrating a system with multi-users, or for some reason you have multi-users on account. You can be logged in. You don't have to log back out. You can simply do SU and then give it that username, and then you can switch to a different account. Of course, they have to be members of Sudo for you to be able to switch to other people's accounts. So as me as the administrator, when y'all have issues on your account on the server, I can actually SU into your account, and then I can take a look at like your config file for your SSH, and I can see if that is configured correctly, or not your config file, but your .ssh directory, to make sure that you have like your public key uploaded on there. And then some utilities that we've talked about, and some others we kind of glanced over. Of course, we kind of have that who am I to find out who you are, and kind of building on that. Now we can throw in the groups command. So that's going to be all of the group membership that you are a part of on the system.
Is this PowerPoint up?
Yeah, I just uploaded and opened it. I was pretty sure I did that. It should be it's one behind because I skipped one, so that's confusing. And then we have ID, which is kind of a more robust versions of group there, because you can kind of see you get your UID, so that is my username, and then there's the number that is assigned to it. Then we have the group ID, which by default I am a member of my own group. And then we have this kind of groups category here. So this is all of the groups that I am a member of right here. And so, of course, Jay Corcoran is in that list, and then so on and so forth. Now, when it comes to creating users on the system, you've probably kind of guessed the theme here. There is a universal way that applies across the board, and then Ubuntu has its own method. The big difference, the universal method, is you have to tell it every single thing you want it to do. It's very good if you want to script something. The Debian method, it is a script itself. So it's going to sit there and prompt you for questions. So it's not, if you're wanting to create multiple users or try to integrate it in a script, it's a bad choice, because it's going to constantly prompt you for information in its own script. So not a good option, but great option if you're just creating like 1 or 2 users. This method right here, great for integrating in a script when you're creating multiple users there. So it's going to be user add. And then we have several different options here, and we'll cover just a few of them. So this one right here is going to force it to create a home directory for the user. Without that, and this is kind of different depending on systems. Some systems will go ahead and create a home directory by default. Some won't. So there is an action or an option that will actually prevent a home user or home directory being created for the user. You just kind of have to know what the default is for your system. And then we got -C, which is going to be a comment section. So oftentimes people will put their full name in there. And then if you work at an organization, this tends to be like a comma separated list that's there, and they will determine field 1 would be their full name, maybe your office number, your telephone, fax, things like that. But the scripted version, it kind of has its own default as far as what it'll ask you. for that comment section. It will ask you for a full name, a username, and so on and so forth. So there is kind of a default that Debian uses, but your organization, they could have something completely different as far as in what order that you supply that, but it's always going to be a comment separated list. And I do believe, yeah, I believe they're going to be like when it's done, it'll be all the fields will be separated by semicolons or colons, sorry. And then you have your home directory. So that's that -D. So these two do not have to match, but oftentimes they will. So whatever username you give, that tends to be the name of the home directory that you would give it. You don't, if you create this, you don't necessarily have to have that. It will default to whatever the username. But if you use the -D, then you could actually make it, a different name, and then it will be linked through that. And we'll see how that linking takes place. So here we have our example right there. So it's going to create the home directory. It's going to have a comment of just test account in there. And then you can see right here, these two are matching right there. So it's going to create that home directory called test count. And then the actual name of the account is always at the end of it of test count. And then at the end, important thing to note right here, user add the universal method. As you can see, there's nowhere in there that it asks for a password. So this account is completely unusable at this point. Yes, it's all created, but it has no password. So therefore, it's kind of in a disabled state. So to enable it, you would need to actually, use the password and then give it the account name. Then it's going to prompt you to enter that password twice. All right, so here is some additional options that we can use. Of course, we've covered those right here. The -G right here. So this is a comma separated list of groups that you can apply to. So if like, for instance, if y'all, I think we had the Linux class group. So I could have actually done -G and given that. And then so you would then be a member. Like if I created it for me and my account name is Jay Corcoran, it would be Jay Corcoran, the user, Jay Corcoran, the group, and then I would have an additional group that would be applied to me of the Linux class. Compare that to the lowercase g. So this is the default group, which by default, it's just going to create a group with your username. If you don't want that, you can override the default group and create something completely different so it won't have the duplicated username there. Then I told you about how you can prevent the home directory from being created. But again, in a Debian-based system, or at least on Ubuntu, by default, it's not created. And then you have also the shell right here. So you may have to specify which shell that you want by default. And this one right here is, I think that was just a different example right there, using everything. Yeah, different example. We covered it all. All right, now, so all this information winds up getting kind of stored in etc password. Actually, there's another location. We'll touch it here in a second. But the first one it's going to hit is this etc password. So that is where we can kind of see all of our accounts. So if we were to cat out, well, then we can see right here, here is all the accounts that we have. So if I want to now create an account, I could say sudo, and then we do user add, and then we'll say, go ahead and create the home directory. We'll give it a comment here of, we'll just say Bob Test here. That's going to be his full name. And we'll just leave the other at a default state as far as the home directory, because it should pick it up fine. And then we'll just give it a name of Bob. I don't think Bob's in our list here. Okay, so let's see if we do tell, actually, just go ahead and cat it out again. Now you can see Bob was created, and then there's its comment that I did. There's home/Bob. So we need to verify that did the actual home directory get created. So we could do an ls on /home. Now we can see Bob did get created as home directory there. So if we wouldn't have done the -m, then Bob wouldn't have had an entry. It would just be the 2, and we'd still have it. And even may say that it exists, but just because these directories exist in here, or their entries, does not mean the directory exists. Sometimes even these logins, a login may say false, and that's just kind of a default. There may be even one in here. Is it at? No, yeah, right here. there's its home directory / non-existent, and a hint, it's non-existent. So it doesn't have to actually be verified. You can type anything and it would just kind of use it in there. Now, is anything different, do y'all see, with Bob versus everybody else? Well, that I think I heard him. Bin bash. Yep, so right here, you got bin sh. So you have to be careful with defaults, because in this case, it actually did sh, which is a smaller version of bash there. And we would like ours to have bash. So if we guess it's going to go away. If we wanted to specify that shell, then we could actually do -s and then just do /bin/bash on there. So that's one of the things you kind of have to note about that universal method, because it is universal. It may have a different shell. In this case, it did.
What if there's a naming conflict, such as the username already exists or the group name, so happens to match with the user that's trying to call?
It will give you message, like if you create the same user, it's gonna, this user already exists, I can't run it. It won't just overwrite whatsoever. If there is a conflict, it will. Of course, the groups can exist, because then you just be applying it to the same group. So then those two people would have the same group. So it wouldn't be a conflict there, but yeah, with the username, it would be a conflict. All right, so let's take a look at how to read that. So first one, username. Now, this right here requires a little bit of explanation. So when Linux first came out back in its early days, your encrypted password was stored right into this etc password file right here. So let's do an ls-l on /etc password. Actually, let's give it a so we see everything. All right, so what would be the problem with all of the encrypted passwords being installed in etc password given this information right here?
It's like anybody can read it.
Perfect. That was a security vulnerability, because everybody could just get in here, read. You say you didn't have to be a member of the group. It was literally everybody on here. So security vulnerability. So they decided to change that, and they created a new file called etc shadow. And shadow holds your actual encrypted password in there, and some additional information that we'll see here in a second. So the X is literally a pointer saying that the password is handled in the etc shadow directory right there. Of course, then you have your user ID, the group ID, and then number 5 is the kind of that comment section there. And then we, of course, have that home directory and then your shell in there. Now, when it comes to deleting, we can use this userdel command. Note by default, when you delete the account, it will just delete the account. That's it. So if you want it to actually delete the home directory, and it does the mail spool by default, and then that right there, if you do it and you don't run a mail server, you're going to get an error for every single one of them that says, hey, the mail server wasn't found in there, but that's normal. There's no way to separate it in there. And then the -f is pretty cool, because if you have a user that's on your system that you want off, you can use the -f, and even if they're on it, it'll kind of lock them right out of the system there. And then there's your example right there, pretty straightforward. And note, again, all of these right here that we're doing require sudo. So it requires you. So it's very, very important. I told you at the beginning of the semester to remember your password, because you're now going to be using it for like every single command, just about. Now here we hit the Debian method right here. So you can see they just switched everything. So this is the universal. Now they just flipped it, and it's add user instead of user add. And this is a complete scripted, a whole lot easier to use, but again, only good if you're creating just a few accounts right there. So if we do sudo and then do add user, and then we'll just create Steve. Now you can see right here, it's kind of giving us all this information, telling us the groups that are available, what was it assigned to, telling the home directory, and then we'll hit this etc scale in a minute. Just remember that entry right there, and then now it's actually prompting us for that password. So it's going to get twice. Now we're hitting the comment section right here. So we're just going to say Steve, because I can't think of anything. And then room number, work phone number, you can leave them all blank right there. And then it's going to ask you if it's correct. We get yes. Now, if we wind up telling /Etsy password, you can see that Steve is in there, and then kind of note the difference in there. For every single entry in there, it was a comma separated list. So it just does empty placeholders for it there. And then if we go ahead again, do an ls on /home, we should see that Steve is in there. Now, this is all done by, it kind of has all these default actions. Now, there are some ways to kind of alter that default action, and it's pretty straightforward. If we just get in here and man add user, let's see. Note that unlike most Unix utilities that has like a single character, all of these are the long versions of that. So you can get in here, like if you don't want it to be able to log in, you can actually set that. You can set the UID, the group ID. You can set what actual home directory is on it. The one thing that is really, really strange on here, and this is really interesting because they've added a lot more. I really need to update my system in there because mine does not have all of these options. And one thing that is missing was, let's see, no, it is here. Mine just has add user and then options and then user and group right here. So it's really strange that I can't, there is no option, at least when there's some different stuff. So unless they've added to it, there wasn't an option to add an additional group. So if I wanted to create an account and I wanted to be a member of the Linux class group in here, I couldn't do that while creating it. But what I could do is do add user again, and then reference the existing user that was already created, and then tag the group at the end, and it will append them to that group. I don't really like that method because you can't just add group while you're creating it and it actually do it. It'll error out in there. So this is just one of those strange syntax right there. And then there are some other like -- in group that you think would work, but they don't. That has to deal with system group. So if you were creating a user or a user that is a system user, then you can kind of use that feature, and it'll actually tell you if you try to use it in here. Gosh, yeah, they've added a whole lot more. They will tell you that the only way to do it is there's actually a configuration file, and then you can give it an option to read the configuration file that has a list of actual groups that you can add to it. But again, no method, unless I'm going to have to go back and now try to look at all these options because there's so many more. There may be a way to do it now. Let's get back. So we added that user, and now on the Etsy password, I just kind of created a list for convenience right here of kind of everything that uses Etsy password. Of course, we have the password, which then kind of, it's really Etsy Shadow that handles it, but it kind of passes it to that. The SU, which switches users. The CH password is a batch mode. It's what I use when I create all of your accounts. It allows me to give it a file, and then it will create or change passwords in a batch mode. And then if you want to change a shell after you've already set it, you can use this command right here, and then it will change that entry to whatever shell. This is kind of that comment section. It allows you to change that information. And then, of course, on creating the users, we have the two different methods, and I kind of put those in a column for creating and deleting those users. And right here, all this is saying is groups. It's good for sharing files and eases management and monitoring right there. And then when it comes to adding groups, this is where things get a little interesting. So this is a universal method. So group add, then you can add the group name. So this right here creates it without creating the user. Of course, you got to use that sudo. Now, here's the interesting part. Let's say that you have a bunch of users that you want to add, like in this class, I had to add all of you to the group. Well, I could do it on the front end in the creation, but if I change something and I need to add y'all to another group, then I have to use user mod. And you have to actually do the -A and Gs. But if I was to use user mod and then give it the actual group right here and then reference the student, so, or the account on here, then it would overwrite all of the membership that student had. So what A says is I want you to append, and G is a list of all the groups that are currently there. So you're appending all the current groups that student one is a member of, and then you're adding accounting to that group. It's just a strange syntax that you have to remember. And early on, I remember screwing this up and deleting like a whole bunch of group membership. And then I had to go back and add it all in there, and probably didn't get all of them correct in the end, but you know, what can you do? Now on Etsy Group, so it has its own file on here. So you can see the first thing is the group name. And then, yes, you can assign passwords to the group. I think this is kind of redundant, because why would you add group members to a group and then password lock them out of the group? If you don't trust them enough to be a member of the group, then why would you add them in to begin with? I don't understand why they have it in there, but yes, you can password them. Of course, that is an addition. It won't ask you to do that. You'll have to manually do that. And then, of course, you have the group ID, and then you have the list of members to CD-ROM right there. So if we get on our system and we used cat/Etsy group, see, we have our list right here of all the group members. And you can see for me, my name is going to be in there several times because I'm a member of, you know, several different groups there. All right. One thing I want to point out is this is singular. The command groups is plural. So completely two different things. That is something that people get confused on. So the file is just group. The command ends with an S right there. So if you create a user and it's not actually a member of Sudo, because by default, when we create our system, everybody's a member. But now if you create one yourself, that person's not going to be a member of Sudo. So just giving you an example right here, a note, because they are single, I can actually combine them. So long as I don't put a space in between it, I don't have to do the dash again. So that's append. It's going to get the existing groups and whatever username, and then add them to that Sudo group. Now they have administrator privileges on the system there. And then again, I want to mention this. I think I did early on in the semester, like Red Hat, it's not Sudo, it's Wheel. That's the group. So even the name can be different depending on the version of Linux. You just have to do your research on all of that stuff. And then here is a bunch of commands that kind of affect with Etsy group right there. We've seen most of those except for the kind of the new ones right there, group add, group del. So you're deleting, adding the group, you're modifying the group right there, kind of the information that's involved with it. And then you've got your user mod, which we've seen that command before, and then groups and ID. So Etsy skeleton, this is a directory that's on all of your systems. And if you create users often on there and you want to have like maybe files or a folder, kind of a directory structure that you like, you can place all of that information into Etsy skeleton. Now, no existing users will get that information. But if you create a new user, that file is read and then all the information is copied to the new user. So then everybody will have the same file structure and the same files that you specify in there. So this contains a lot of defaults on your system, and it's kind of fun to look at. So let's cat out /Etsy. What was it? Login. Can't remember now. Login.dev. And now it will tell you in a lot of this, there's going to be things that are handled by new software. So you'll see those that kind of keep a running log of what was changed. So it's always good to kind of read that, as some configurations kind of become obsolete. They pass them to something on else. You can, I think mail server right here is handled by another file, if I remember right. Yeah, PAM configuration, I believe. Yeah. So all that mail settings is kind of passed on. But I wanted to point out a few things in here, if we can find them. Let's see, right there, SU name, it actually defines that SU is the one that does that. Here is where your path is starting to be built. So if you wanted to change that, you could change that here. Of course, any bit of this, again, this is all global configuration. So if you want to make something just for you, it's not a good place to do it in there. But your UMask is one, yeah, right here. So this is where your system gets that default UMask right here. Of course, if you want a different UMask, you could then put it in your bash RC, or better yet, you create a file that bash RC would read. So that way it's preserved right there. And here's where you're going to get some of your information about how long your password's valid for. So just lots and lots of information can be configured right here. We're not going to spend time and go through it or anything, but just wanted to show you that it did exist, and you can kind of get in there and edit that file. So Etsy Shadow, this is that entry. So here's kind of the link in between right there. So it's going to have your username first instead of last in there. And then you're going to have your encrypted and salted password right here. And then something to point out right here, as encryption changes, they do update their encryption. So this is kind of the list right here. It's the most current one, I think, right now, being that this is the newest one, that YesCrypt right there. And you can figure out what your system is using by the very, very first part right there. So you can kind of map that in there. So $6 right here. That would be SHA-512 right there. So this entry right here is getting pretty old. All of our systems should be using YesCrypt as the last time that I checked, which was last semester. So should be up to date. Then you can see that these entries, not all of them are going to have information. Some of them are just blank right there. But you know, there really is no key. You just kind of have to know this information. So that keeps track of the last time the password was changed. Here's the minimum number of days that you have to change, or that a change can take place. You have your maximum. This is going to be the, you know, before your password expires, when do you want to warn the user? And then if the account expires, how many days before it just becomes inactive and they can't actually, you know, change that password. They got to then contact you. And then of course, when you want that to expire right there. And you can see a lot of that information doesn't exist, especially that expire, inactive, and warn there on it. Most of your systems are just going to allow you to create a password, and it'll just be there forever unless you get in there and actually set that up. And then this is pointing out that the time value of 0 was given to January 1st, 1970 right there. So that's why some of the dates and stuff seem a little funky on the system if you dig into that. And that's because they're days since January 1st of 1970. All right, let's see how we're doing. 11:20. I think we got time. Sometimes I cut this out, but someone actually specifically asked for this, so we're going to go over it. Scheduling tasks. There used to be 2 different methods for scheduling tasks. That was cron tab and then at. The cron tab allows you to specify something that's going to continually repeat. The at job was like if you wanted something to occur one time in the future. You can download it, but it's slowly just becoming depreciated. And now, as my system no longer included it, so yeah, it doesn't have it. But if we did which cron tab, cron tab, there we go. That's not going to be on there. Cron tab, you can see cron tab is on there. So anyway, at slowly be depreciated. I never used at one time because it's only, you set it all up and you use it one time. It just seems kind of a waste. Most of the time, if I want to schedule a task, I want it to occur over and over and over. Now, it runs a kind of a daemon in the background. That's just a process that kind of continually keeps this thing up. It reads the actual cron tab file there, and then make sure that it's running those jobs right here. Now, it's very, very cryptic, as you can kind of see. This is an entry that you will have to manually type out in your system. So the first one is the minute. Then we have the hour. And then of course, this one right here, it's saying on the 13th and the 19th hour. Then you have the day of the month. So the star is going to mean it happens every day of the month. And it's going to happen every month. And then it's going to happen on the 1 through 5 as far as days of the week. And then you have your command right here. Of course, this is options to the command. And then it's redirecting some stuff from dev/null here. It's kind of a bad example, but this right here is the entire command that then would run at that specified time. And I think I have this break it down a little bit better for you. So 0, so that would occur just, so if you gave it 1 for the hour, then gave it 0, then that would be 1 o'clock right there. And then of course, day of the month, it's 1 through 34, day of the year, 1 through 12. And the only thing you kind of have to remember is days of the week, 0 is Sunday. They didn't start it with a 1 there. And then of course your command, of course, asterisk is all valid values. So again, kind of like the month right there, if you did the asterisk on it, it would run every single month there. And then this right here is going to create a list, and then a dash will create a range right there. Now, if you want to edit it, you need to have, if you want to edit someone else's, as like an administrator, you can edit someone else's, make sure that you have root privileges in order to be able to do that. Otherwise, you're just going to have access to your cron tab. And then this right here, it's confusing on this part. So this is kind of like who's allowed to actually edit the thing. So by default on your system, on Ubuntu, you're not going to have these files. But if there is a cron.allow in there, then you put a username in it, then only that person can actually use cron tab whatsoever. Now, if you do not have that and you have a cron.deny and then you put a user in it, then everybody can use the cron except for the person that you put in there. And then, of course, if you don't have any of these, then everybody can use cron tab. It's a strange thing. And you can see right here, cron tab, the file locations, they're different depending on the system. And I believe somewhere, even this setup right here can change depending on the system right here. So it's just one of those things you got to research again and figure out what your system does.
Yeah. They're saying cron tab is the newer method of creating.
Not a newer method. It's really old. It's just they had it's the one that repeats on an interval. At was around the same time. It just does one single job and then forgets it.
So what's becoming the new method?
There is no new method. This just is the method, is using cron tab. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I thought you said it was becoming depreciated.
At is.
Oh.
So just the at one is right there, but the cron tab, it's here to stay for right now, as far as we know. Now, in order to edit that, luckily you don't have to actually know where the file location is. You can actually just do cron tab -E. First time you open it, if you've never opened it before, it's going to list all of the text editors on your system, and it asks you to choose which text editor you want to edit the file with. From that point on, it's then going to open it by default. You can do -L, and if there are any jobs in there, it's going to list it right there. Then you can remove it with -R and then edit other users with -U. Of course, you have to have that root privileges there. So first I'll open it up and we can kind of see. So now it's saying right now, the easiest one, it actually lets me know nano, but I refuse to do the easy one. And then it knows that I have tiny on here, the Vim tiny or Vim basic. Of course, Vim basic is what I will use here. So we hit enter. And then here it's telling you all about it, but it's nice. It actually gives you an example right here. So this is backing up this directory right here, /var backups home.tar.gz. So, this is the directory. Of course, it's adding TGZ to the file extension there. So you can run the backup, 5 a.m. every week. So if we look at that, this is the minute, this is the hour. So 5 a.m. and then it's the, oh gosh, is it the month? Can anybody remember? Is it day of month or month first?
Day of month.
Day of month, and then day of week right there. And then where it's going to actually run that command. So, and then they kind of give you, if I would have looked right there, they give you the little key at the end. So we'll do a little practice right here. And I just gave you that one. So we'll do this one. How do I schedule a job to run at 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. every day? Anybody? We'll do a couple of them. Call out what's the order? So I know it's hour first and then the Or no, yep, you're right, minute first. So we got the minute, we got the hour, then we've got what, the day of month, and then we have the month. I'll just spell it out, month, and then the day of the week, and that's it, right? Okay, so somebody help me out. 5 a.m., 5 p.m. So what is the minute? What's it going to run? 0. Perfect. All right. Now, what is the actual hours?
17.
5. So comma 17, because we got 2 of them. And then every day. So what's next? Asterisk, 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 right? Perfect. We got that. Let's go down to, I think we got it. So we'll do the most difficult one. How do I schedule a job to run on January 1st, March 1st, June 1st, and October 1st at 9:30 p.m.? So what's our first thing that we need to worry about? Minute. So what would it be? 30. Yeah. All right. Then what's next? Our hour, right? 19. Good job.
21.
20. Yeah, 19. Oops. Yep. Yep. Military time. All right. Then now we've got what? What comes next?
1.
Yeah. So it's the first, comma, 10. And then we've got, so that's our months. Day of month. Yeah, just one. We'll squeeze it in there. We're going to get this right. Day of month, and then day of week. It doesn't care, right? So it'd be the star right there. And then of course, whatever command. Let's see how we did. 30, 21, 1, 1, 3, 6, 10 star, and then command. All right, we did it. Completely intuitive, right? Okay, switching gears, disk usage. So I'm just going to cover these next couple of things right here in the terminal. It'll be a little bit easier. So if you want to see all the like everything that's mounted as far as hard drives on your system, you can use DU. Nope, sorry, DF. And you'll see all the mount points and the type of file systems on here. Unfortunately, we're on Windows subsystem for Linux, right? So it uses, what is it, a VHDX file for that. And so that thing just kind of shows all the space that's available. It doesn't really care, but it's not real space. It actually expands as more files are put into it. It makes it larger. Unfortunately, I don't think you have to actually go in and manually try to shrink it. It doesn't just automatically shrink as it automatically grows for that. So anyway, the values are kind of false. So it's not a good, if you run on a real system, you're going to get a lot more useful information. But one thing you can do that I love to do is the -H command that makes everything human readable. And now it makes a little bit more sense right here. So you can see there's a device right here. So this is the actual hard drive, and it's saying this is the root of our system. And it's saying it has 1007 gigs available to us. Of course, we all know that it's not taking up that much space on here. Unfortunately, and then it's saying that the drivers here are taking up 472 gigs. I can promise you my drivers directory is not taking up that. It's just the way that it tries to expand, and then it just creates a whole bunch of false information. I don't know mine. Has anybody done this on their system? Is Snap coming up on any of y'all's, like a whole bunch of Snap entries down here? That's strange. On my system and the actual server, like a whole bunch of Snap entries from that, the virtual machine that's running the software. Maybe it's that we haven't run any software from the Snap app repository there on this machine. Maybe it probably creates it on the fly when I do that, because I know I've created it on my system. All right, so that kind of gives you just an overall blueprint of your system. And like I said, a whole lot more useful. You'll see, like if you have multiple hard drives, you'll see all of that information in there. And so you can kind of get a real quick glance how your system is doing as far as space goes. Now, if you want to understand an individual like point in your system, like a directory, we'll just do it on my home directory. Then you can use DU. So if we do that, Then you can kind of see, because I've connected with VS Code, if I scroll up, it'll wind up running out of information. It did so much here. But if you don't have all this stuff in yours, it would be a lot shorter. But we can at least find out right here, there's the total. And of course, we have the same thing we can do here. We can do the -H, and then we can see that 230 megabytes taken up in my home directory here. Let's see if we can give it like sandbox here. That would probably be a better one. So if we do -H and then give it the sandbox. Now, that's a whole lot easier to read right here. We can see that it just in my directory. Again, each individual directory, it does not do the files. And then, of course, at the end, it's kind of your summary right here. There's the total. And if you just want the total, you can also kind of come over here and just put an S, and then it's going to give you that same entry without all the other files in there. So real quick way to kind of get a picture of how much space it's taken up on there. I love this method a whole lot better than Windows method. The Windows method aggravates me all the time when I'm wanting to find out that information. Now, if you want something a little bit newer, we can do sudo apt install ncdu. All right. So then we can run ncdu on the system, and it's a little bit, more fun to look at there. And it kind of has the graph as what's taking up the most space. And so we can see that VS Code server is taking up the majority of space in here. And then at the end, you can see that total disk usage. Of course, you can scroll in here as well, but we got 282.9 megabytes taken up right there. And then you can also do, if you have like that VS Code, most of these have that option. It'll be like a -- exclude in there. And so you can kind of give it that information and then just list out the drives you don't want it to. So if you were doing it like on the root of this, you're going to have all of those mount points on there. So /mount, because that's Windows, you don't want that information. So if you want to actually see what Linux is doing, you'd want to exclude the /mount directory, because here it's hitting all of my Windows directories and crawling through those. Not something that we want to do there. And I don't have that on there because I try to cover just the most default and then throw in some stuff, and y'all can kind of write that down there. And this is everything that we covered. Now, two final things to pick up there. 1134. That is top. So we've seen how processes, I believe PS command is how we've looked at processes. The PS command is a snapshot. So it's just like at that very moment, what process are running, what does my system look like? Top is going to be active. So you can actively monitor your system. Of course, this system right here is absolutely boring because nothing is going on. But on a server, things would be moving. Like you saw it, like if you didn't blink right there, it actually did move right there. So it is actively monitoring that. Q to quit to get out of that. So you can see at the very, very top, that's kind of all your system information: CPU, memory, how long the system has been up. Just lots of information about the system. And then these three all kind of go together, but they're kind of split up as, the active process. So you're going to get the PID, who actually ran the process, and then on the right side, what the process is. And then here you're kind of getting, what kind of hit is this taken on the computer, the individual entries there. And then I have Q to quit. And here's some other stuff. If you want like a color mode, Z on that, you can actually do like trees. So you can see, kind of trace down where the processes came from. So it can be configured. Now, this right here, I left in here. One day I was sitting here writing all this stuff, and then I looked down and class had already started. So I didn't have time, and then I just added the entry because it makes you look cool. And then I haven't changed it because honestly, it's the exact same thing, and that is the honest truth. It makes you look cool. That's why you would want to run this thing. And here's why. So if you do htop, oops, it's no longer installed. So we can do sudo apt install htop. Isn't that funny? It used to be installed by default. So same information. This just looks a whole lot cooler, right? Completely configurable. So if you go in here, hit F2, you can see that we could enable tree view if we wanted to. Let's see. Go over here. You can organize kind of the columns that's in it. You can actually change if you want the CPU to be, you know, you can make it the memory a bar, kind of swap them around here. So you can see actively how that is all changing right there. So configure it how you want to. It's highly configurable. You can see right here, it kept that entry with the tree view. So now we can kind of track down where those processes came from. And then to get out is the weirdest thing. It's F10 right here. And on my laptop, I have everything, like all those keys, they do like play music and stuff. So you always have to remember it's like function F10. And that always gets me. I'll wind up hitting F10 and wind up playing some music or something on my computer there. All right. So I think that is all that was in there. We are officially done with this course as far as the lecture goes. Any questions on anything that we covered in here?
I don't know if this is a silly question or not, but in the password file, what does it mean when you attach a shell to a user? Like
In the Etsy password? Okay, that is just the default shell that comes up when the user logs in. That doesn't mean that they are locked into that shell. They can change the shell. They can log into another shell. Like you can have as many shells as you want on the system and switch in between them. It needs to know when you log in, what is the default shell I need to select. That's all. The fact that that one had SH, we could just change to bash on there. And you can see that there was multiple shells. That one SH is on here. We could have used that, but it's just, I mean, why? It's a smaller, not as good shell on that. Good question. All right. Any other questions? All right. So if I was to create a user using the universal method, does it default to bash or not?
Is,
What? Think somebody?
no,
No. Okay, good. If I use the Debian method, does it default to bash or not? Yes, it does default to bash. Okay, good deal. Now I'm going to cover a couple of more things. We've got plenty of time here. So one is your final exam. I looked it up. Your exam is going to be Thursday, May 1st, 11 to 1 p.m. I will make post an announcement here today or tomorrow morning with that information. And now it's between 11 and 1 p.m., but because it is a take home and it is open book, open internet, open everything for you to work on, I will just probably open it up at 7, but with the same due date time of 1 p.m. So you'll have 7 to 1 p.m. to complete that. So you can kind of do it when you want. Now, it's not going to take you that much time. It'll take you like kind of probably a little bit less than what an exam would, to be honest, but sometimes some people take a little bit longer, but no longer than the 2-hour window that's there. It's not that long. Now, one thing I will note is, let's just pull this up. Test options. You're going to want to read this at the very, very beginning. It'll pop up on your exam. And one of the first things it says is there's no partial credit given because you can all grade your own work on here. So it's going to be right or wrong. And some of them, the questions are like 6 to 8 points a piece. So you miss 2 questions and they're 8 points. There's 16 points gone. It's a hard hit. So just make sure you take your time and do this. Read the instructions carefully. I also tell you right here, don't use the depreciated apt-get commands. You're going to need to use the apt command. So if I see apt-get, then that's a 0 for that command. I'm telling you right here, you're a regular user. So you make that assumption on here. So assume you are logged in. There's also this script. That script is at the very, very beginning. So, and then also just to point out, again, Mac users, there is a Mac version on here because you can't create users. I'll let you know you're going to be creating users. You're going to be installing software, doing kind of that stuff. You can't do that as a Mac. So In the Mac version, I may ask you similar questions and you're just going to have to put the command in there. But because you're not actively doing all of the work that's along with it, I included a few more questions that make you think a little bit more to kind of make up for the fact that you're not actively in there doing it. Of course, if you have a Mac and you don't want to use the Mac, then you can either, this classroom will be open. If you want to install the WSL here, you've got 330. If you let me know, I can get you on a machine in 330. They're dual boot machines. They're Linux Mint, which are Debian based. So everything works on that. I will be here on Thursday. So just come and knock on my office if you need help getting those up and running. So you can do the whole thing in there. It's just you're having to do it here versus at home. Now, there is this script right here. So I want to explain the script. You're going to download this script to your system only for the Ubuntu version right here. And then you're going to have that script in the same directory that you're working in throughout the whole entire semester. It must be in the same directory. Now, going back to this. Is there anything else I wanted to point out? I don't think so in here. So the way this is going to work, most of these are going to be file upload questions. There are going to be some just regular questions, but I will have you complete a task on your system. Then I will have you rerun the same command, but you're going to append a redirection to a given file name. So therefore, instead of you getting the standard output, it redirects that output to that file. Those files must be spelled correctly on your system. And you'll upload that file to Blackboard that you redirected to. So that contains your answer on there because there's no other way to answer it. It's just a browse. And then at the very end of the exam, you will run the extraction SH script, and that will read all of those files you created for a condensed grade for me to grade. And that's worth points just doing that. And then you'll take the resulting file from that script you ran and upload it to the very last question. And then I can then just download that, and then I can quickly grade. If there's for some reason, I don't see the information, I then can go into the exam and kind of look at your individual redirection that you did. So I'll have access to those files. But that's kind of like just I guess, a backup plan to if something happens on that script. So that's kind of the way that works. Again, I have people that think that they know the answers to the question, and then I can go back and look and see they completed the exam in 20 minutes, and then they get a 30 on it. And that is because they did not go through and do this on your system. If you do it on your system and it works, I say that in here, if it works on your system, then it's correct. So just take the time, do it on your system. Don't try to rush through it and, be done with it, because it can hit you in the end. 8 points a pop. Now, I am actively adding a couple of more things to it. So anyway, it'll be between 6 or 8 points right there. So it may lower and it may not hit as hard, but still probably around 6 points there. So any questions with that? What you got?
Wanted to kind of like study to prepare before the exam. Is there anything that you like highlight or?
This is basically the system administration side. So there's only a few things there. And like I said, it's open book, open internet. You can Google this stuff. You're just going to be completing it on the system. Now, again, make sure that you can connect to the server without getting a password. Passwords are shut down right now. So just connect to it. If it denies you, then you've got a problem, because not the whole exam, but maybe 1 or 2 questions, you're going to have to actually get on that server. And I am not going to open it up during the exam, because that's part of the exam, having that set up.
Just to make sure, you say that it has to be done in the correct directory, it's just the home directory of our account on the server?
It doesn't matter the directory. You can create your own directory and just place it in that. It's just once you start, make sure all the files you create are in the same directory as the script. In other words, my script's not going to do a find and find those files. It's looking in the present working directory for the answers.
So, will the exam have a time limit, or will it just be?
The time limit is the due date. So if you start at 7, you have until 1. If you start at 12:30, you have 30 minutes. So it's up to you on your time limit, how much you want. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Gonna have some quick fun right here real fast. Okay, so yeah, Monday, yeah, that was yesterday, right? I actually sat down and decided to write a better script. If you remember before, when I created the users, I had like one script that created the users, one script that deleted, one script that added the group, and so on and so forth. But I decided to finally sit down and create a better version of it. So we're going to take a look at that. So the first thing, we're just going to see how it actually operates here. So believe there is, yeah. Where's my test roster? There it is. Okay. Yeah, still got it. Okay, so I'm going to try to run the script. The first thing it does is it checks to see, am I root? Because I'm creating users, so I've got to have root access. So we can fix that problem. Oops. Run it here. Now we have this. So it expects some options here and here. So the first thing, script requires options and a text file. And then here's the syntax right here. And then it's saying, okay, it wants options and then it wants a file. So here's my options. Here's the file. So we have dash dash add to create the users, remove. And then I forgot to remove that one. That entry is no longer valid in there. And then, of course, the file, kind of some information about the file. I need to expand on that, but I kind of ran out of time. But basically, it's looking for a star.import. But there's some differences that I tweaked at the end. I just ran out of time to be able to get that all in there. So the first thing we're going to do is, so you can take a look at, so we have the spring, fall here. So this is just some fake accounts. The first thing to notice is here is kind of the mimicking the UCA ID, but this account does not have one. I've run into that, and then it screws everything up, and it did some wild, crazy things in class when I ran it. It created a whole bunch of files with like B0 as the name of it. It just did crazy stuff, and it didn't want to stop until, you know, it ran through all of it. So then I had all these files in my home directory that were just everywhere, and I had to clean it all up manually. Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's give it an option, but let's just give it some garbage right here. So, oh, that's not going to do anything, is it? So let's go back up and give it the options dash dash add, and then give it some garbage here. So this is pretty cool. As the usage actually change, it actually tells the file and says, hey, this must be a file. So it's just checking to make sure that that is a file in there. So now let's give it the correct file, which was spring_fall. So now we hit enter. It's converting the file, and then it already exists. So give me a second. I guess we'll see the remove here. All right, so now we'll see the file, and actually let me just start over. RM class today. What is today? 4/22. 4 and the 22. Make sure I get the right one there. Yes, delete it. All right, now let's go back to add. So you should see the converting the file since it was the first time. And then here we have the user add, Joe Bob, and then he was added to the group, and it has complete. And then at the end, it does passwords, and that was successful. And then it gives me a warning down here that there were blank passwords. And then it actually tells me to cap this file right here. So now we can see btest had a blank password found. So now I have a log of all the users that did not get created on the system there. Now, we already saw the remove, but we're going to go ahead and run that one more time to show something else. All right, so now it removed them from the system. Matter of fact, I should have been doing this, we can we tell /etc/password. So we can see they're not there. That should be the very, very bottom entry. So now let's go ahead and then add them back. Now this time, because we've already ran it once, it's not going to convert the file because the file already exists. It's going to check for that. So no conversion here. And now let's verify that they were created. There's Joe Bob A. Duff. Now I also have a debug mode. So we can set debug equal to true. And now they hit enter. You can see it converted the file and then gave me some debug information. So now I can see if something went wrong here, here's all the files that it actually created. And so I can see at each step that, you know, what the file was actually doing right there. And of course, it forces that all of this happens. The conversion is where it all happens at. So it forces that conversion to go back in. So now that we've seen how it works, I want to show you a couple of things in it. Well, I guess that'll have to do. I can't make it get smaller here. All right, so first thing, declaring variables right there. And then I have my class group in case it ever changes. I want to make that a variable. That's a kind of a best practice. And then because the files are actually put a date in that, so I just actually get the date right here, and then I can integrate that into any file name. So because I use it multiple times, I just did it here, and then here I'm actually integrating it to a file name. So this is the actual result at the end right here, what it creates. It starts with class-roster, gives the current date right there, and then gives it an extension of .import, so that way it's distinguished. And then I could have, instead of converted that, if I already have it, I can just give it the .import, and then it will not do the conversion for me because it actually reads that it's a .import file. And then, of course, I just had this placeholder string. That's what you saw between the actual information and the complete right there. And then this argument 3, that's what's capturing my debug. Now, here's an interesting thing that took place is I wanted it to have a value regardless if I used it or not. So what is this right here? What am I telling it to do? Anybody remember this at all? Okay, so when does it set the false? When does that occur? No, not exactly. It's going to do it no matter what. Anybody remember what this syntax is for? It's when you have a variable that has no value. So I'm going to set it to false. So I set it to $3. So if $3 had nothing, then it actually passed on right here through debug. It passed on that value of nothing. And then, of course, it read it right here and said, okay, it had no value. So now I'm going to set it to false, and I'm going to keep it as false. Because remember, if we did : it's just going to set it to false just for this instant and then forget about it. So now, is anybody, well, we haven't covered that. The reason why I had to do it in 2 phases is because any type of special positional parameter, they are read-only after. So you can't, in the script, you cannot overwrite them. It'll give you an error in there. And then, as you kind of probably used to, my printf statements, I'll just like to put that up so I don't have to sit there and specify it over and over. And then this is the cool trick with the actual root. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to show you. So you have ID, that command that we saw, but if you give it -uname, then that is going to actually return the current user. And then here's another thing that's cool is if we do sudo and run something, that it is switching your user to root. So with this is checking if the current user that's running this script is not root, then it's going to echo this. So the fact I do sudo /user, it's not me running the script at that point. I've taken on root. So that is a cool trick to actually check to see, do you have root privileges or not in a script? And so that way, because it's against a best practice to put sudo in here. You don't want to put sudo in your scripts. And this is just a good way to force you to actually, have it correct before you start it. Otherwise, you're just going to get a whole bunch of errors the entire time. And then that blank pass right here, I'm just checking if the file exists and is a normal file. If it is, again, I only want this to check to see if the current users, had a blank password. So if it exists, then go ahead and remove it because it's going to create a new one here. So that just makes sure I don't have some old data that, skews my information. This one's fun. This is that help message right here. I put it in a function. This part right here, this is the interesting part. So you saw how we had like colored text or underlined text. Well, this is the really horrible code for an underline right here. This is the horrible code to end an underline, and all of the color codes start with the /e and the bracket as well. And then you kind of give it this information at the end to change what it does. Printf does not support underlines or color. So I did it with an echo statement here, which does support it, save it to a variable, and then I used the variable inside here. So that way it had its underline. So I kind of worked around that process. What am I doing right here? Anybody even remember what the syntax is called? Heard something.
Are you expanding into where it can, when you do the dot slash, you can then use any four of those inside those curly braces?
No, not exactly. String pattern matching.
Or
Anybody remember string pattern matching?
like the percentage or the,
Pound? Yes, okay. So that controlled what we're kind of what we're cutting off, right? So all I did right here was cut off the path. So this right here is showing me the actual script. This is $0, so it's gonna be a script name. If I ran this like 3 directories, you know, from where it's actually located, then it would put all those directories there. I didn't want that. So I did this where it just removes the, actually, it should be double pound right there and not single pound. Because it would only move 1. So I need to update that to double pound. So that way it catches everything and the single slash only leaving me with the script name. And then because by default it puts the dot slash, but I stripped that away because that's how we run scripts. I put the dot slash in front of it. So now it's going to say dot slash and then the actual SH script right there. And then just to keep everything kind of in line, how I did the indent, you know, that percent S6 right here, I just gave it nothing, but it's using the pattern. So that way it just gives it some space to kind of bump everything to the side there. Now we've got the function add users here. So it's taking in, and I like to do this right here. It's not required. It's just a comment. So this is what I'm passing to the actual script when it's called. So that way I don't have to look somewhere else. And then I'm converting all of that information as the converted user list is going to be $1. So then I kind of set that and make sure it's all local. And then here's where I'm using that string pattern matching again, because this creates a file, and I should have showed y'all that. It's going to create a file to be username, password. And so this user add, it only needs the password. The CH password needs username, password. So I kind of figured out what they had in common. So all I had to do right here was strip off the actual password. And you can see I'm calling user add. I'm setting the shell here. I'm creating a home directory, and then I'm adding your groups. And of course, it's the class group, which is the Linux class server. And then ID is the actual username. I didn't get a chance. I need to go back here and make my variables a little bit more descriptive, but again, ran out of time on that. And then it's going to check for the success of that. If it was successful, then I get that printf statement right here. And so that's the format. So it's the 2 placeholders. Here's the actual information that's in that string, and then the complete at the end. So this is another trick that I wanted to show y'all that, you know, you're not going to hardly find on a book. I think I found it on the internet. If you create a placeholder of a string and you give it a point and then put it after it, because you normally do that for, like, you know, your numbers, your decimals. But if you give it that, and then right here, you can see I've got custom, just a string. That's all it is. And then I put the username in it. Then we got a string, and then I'm giving the actual group right here. And then I'm calling string after it. And that's the ... Well, I've limited it with that 85. So altogether from here all the way to the end of that string, it can only take up 85 spaces. So if it's super long and there's only a few spots left, and the string just takes up what's there. If it's super short, then that huge string then does ... all the way to the end, but still ends at the same time. So you get that nice little dots after it format. It's really cool little trick. And then of course, if it fails, you get the unsuccessful right there. And then of course, that's a while that we're just piping in the converted user list too. And then we're following up with changing passwords and then removing. It's pretty much the same exact thing right there. It's stripping all of that, only we're calling user del. We're doing the -R right here, which is going to get the home directories. And then we're just passing the information. And then I need to remove this because I have this right here to actually handle that before. Well, no. I kept that in there because of the mail spool. So I don't want to see the mail spool. So now mail spool, all those errors just go to that, and it doesn't clutter up my nice printout right there on the end. And then here's where the conversion takes place. It's pretty much what we've seen. You've got everything converted lowercase. You've got me removing the header. using sed to look for all the quotes and replace them with nothingness. So it deletes the quotes, multiple way of deleting quotes. That's just the way that I chose. And then we've got our awk right here. So it's going to be comma separated, and then it's going to output with a colon. Then right here, this is the password column. It's checking to see if there is nothingness in the password. If there's nothingness, then it's going to print the username, and it's going to send it to blank underscore password dot log, and then it's going to skip. So in other words, it's not going to process anything else in here. It's going to move to the next line. Of course, if it has a password, this all fails, and then it just prints the password or the username and the password separated by the colon. And then that's just the error checking right here. Kind of, I have the generic that I'm doing, and then kind of the custom that I'm calling with it. And this one right here this is how it's testing to see if those, do I convert the file or do I not convert the file? So the first thing is just checking the directory. Is there a dot import? If there is, then it's going to choose false. Here, it's checking to see if there is an import with the current date and the debug is not set to true. So this is how I force it. If I set debug to true, that it cannot run this or it can't set the already converted list to true. It sets it to false. And then when you actually call the -- add, it uses those flags right there. So if it's false, then it's going to run the user conversion. And then, of course, give the source. Then it's going to go ahead and use that file to create it. Of course, if this is true, if that conversion has already taken place, then it just skips this line altogether and then runs that. Now, does anybody see anything weird with these statements right here? The conditions. Something I've not taught you before.
The and operator outside of the test.
I am doing that, but specifically with the test, have I ever done a test that way? What's missing from the test that we would normally have?
Yeah.
The if, right? There are people that argue you should probably never do an if. Of course, you know, it's just an argument back and forth. So understand all these conditions these tests are doing, they do not require the if statement. They're just producing a 0 or 1. Well, what does the and read? Success or failure, right? So if this produces a 0, then I can just do an and, Boolean and then run my code right here, run this function. If this gives me a 1, then the and breaks, and this is not run right there. So you can shorthand these if statements if you want to just attest and then use the Boolean operators to make your code run from there. So kind of a neat little trick that you can do. And of course, and remove does the same thing right here. You know, just removing and adding, that's the only difference. It still will do the conversion if it needs to. And then this is where I'm setting my debug status right there. So I'm just seeing if it's true. And this right here is one of the first files. I just want to make sure those files exist right there, because otherwise it's kind of pointless. So I just set that condition. It's not really needed, but then it just echoes out all this stuff. And of course you can see right here, that's the color code for red. And then here's the closing color code for red. And then if it reads at the end to see if that blank password file exists and is a normal file in my directory. And if it is, then it gives me this message right there. So, all right. So real quick question. I know that going through that, you can't grasp all of it. But do you like seeing that kind of code in the class? All right. Because it's kind of you got to figure out, spend too much time, it becomes overly boring and monotonous, but I like to cover it sometimes, but I was wanting y'all's opinion whether if you like it or not. I try to just highlight at least things that maybe we haven't covered, because they're kind of more hacks and workarounds in that kind of more clever code. All right. So I've had a great semester. I hope y'all enjoyed the semester, but this is the last time that we are going to meet. So thank y'all. Y'all have been a wonderful class. Thursday, we are not going to meet. That's just going to be a project work day. Remember, your project is due by the end of that day. So, and then our final will be a take home. So we won't meet for the final as well. So hope y'all had a great semester.
I just have like, mix it or not, but I'll just go myself. So if I do like on the, can work pretty well. But as soon as I try to connect. No, see what was, I don't know what was happening, but like when I would connect to the class server, it would run like slow as anything.
I have trouble, like, it's not a very powerful server. I mean, it's like, it costs me $10 a month with everybody using it, so it gets here. I'll probably need to increase it a little bit, but it does have slowdown on it.
Okay.
And it could be that everybody was doing stuff on it, but then I was doing, because I was working on it quite a bit.
Okay, then I'll just know that for future, but. No, it works, so.
But I'm hoping to integrate the server more, but if I do, I'm gonna have to upgrade the server.
Thank
Do you have like 10 or 15 minutes to meet after this regarding the lab computer? That's from the network security
I
project.
don't, I, that feels right after.
Okay.
So, but I'm 30.
All right, so could I just maybe meet you here at like 1:30, 1:35, something like this? Okay. Thank you.
I just, meet me at my office, I'll probably be, unless you catch me
Slightly
walking around.
traumatized, but that's pretty normal. This is real quick, on the semester project.
Oh, sorry, hang on. There you go, sorry.
Listen, there's one thing that like frustrated me. File.
Oh, no, that's where I copied it over in the underside, okay.
So I don't know, that could be something, I mean, it's easy, you
I
just
try
log
to
in and
catch
find it.
it, yes, and I'll update it, but every time, because I copied and pasted it and from the PDF, it will not be the underside.
That's just something that was like, when I love to look at it with anybody.
Well, I'm-
doing it should know, you know.
I'm glad you pointed it out because it needs to be fixed.
Yeah, but anyway, I think this what's the answer, for some reason, when I do it, that being said that it doesn't show all of them like those here, it shows one less, I think because of the space area.
Yeah, well,
It's touch screen. I just submitted. Yeah, if I go to my actual. I don't find that's, you know, about, I didn't want it to mess up your, look at that. Don't want it to mess up your auto grade.
yeah.
Okay, so you just add it in.
I haven't had to do the update.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that wasn't something I would do.
It's not those small things that get you.
Did you see my?
It's so many emails. Last name.
Orvin?
Oh, let me go. No, I didn't.
So pretty much, I won't be able to be here on Thursday. I can go to a
Okay.
Funeral,
But you've presented
Yeah,
or you are, okay.
so do I need to worry about like the?
No, you sent me the email on that and what did you say it was for?
Funeral.
Yeah, okay, that's excused completely, so I will mark it, exclude you from that, so it won't count against you.
Appreciate it.
Oh, okay.